Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really fascinating chapter from Feynman, chapter 34, relativistic effects in radiation.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting. We're moving past the sort of static or slowly moving charge scenarios.
Exactly. We're diving into what happens when charges move fast, like really fast.
Yeah,
Close to the speed of light, see a dollars.
and how the light they emit is, well, completely transformed by that speed. It's not just brighter or dimmer.
It changes frequency, direction.
Yeah,
Its whole character shifts because of relativity.
right.
So our mission today, especially if you're maybe a physics student grappling with the math, is to build some intuition. We want to give you that aha moment for concepts like Leonard-Weichert potentials, synchrotron radiation.
Without getting totally bogged down in the equations,
That's
right? Focus on the why.
exactly, the conceptual clarity.
And the core challenge, really, the thing that underpins all of this complexity, is that constant speed limit.
Nothing goes
Constant.
faster.
Nothing. So the electric or magnetic field you measure right now at time tau dollars, it can't possibly depend on where the charge is now.
Because the information hasn't had time to reach you.
Precisely. It has to depend on where the charge was at some point in the past. And that idea, that delay, that's retarded time. That's the bedrock.
Okay, let's unpack that because it sounds simple, but it causes all sorts of mathematical headaches, doesn't it?
It does. When you look at the general formulas for the electric field dollar and magnetic field dollar of a moving charge, they're complicated.
Especially the electric field. Enlightenment shows it has terms depending on the charge's velocity, but also, crucially, its acceleration.
That's the key part for radiation. The acceleration term is what dominates when we talk about light being emitted. The magnetic field dollars is actually simpler in a way. It's directly related to dollars and the charge's velocity relative to you.
But the delay, this retarded time, which Feynman calls tau dollar, it's not just a fixed delay, is it?
No, that's the tricky bit. If the charge is, say, a distance irregular away, you might think the delay is just $3. But if the charge is moving...
Then the distance dollar it was away when it emitted the light is different from where it is now, or even where it was $3.
Exactly. You need to find the specific past time tau such that the light emitted at that exact moment, tau traveled the distance from its position at tau to reach you now at tau or c car.
So the equation is tau TRC. You're solving for tau, but $2 itself depends on tau.
Right. It's often not solvable algebraically. Feynman describes this neat geometrical way to think about it. Imagine the whole path the charge took.
Okay.
And imagine a sphere expanding backwards in time from your current position at the speed of light, where that sphere intersects the particle's past path. That's the point, the retarded position in time. That determines the field you feel now.
So you have to figure out the particle's position, velocity, and acceleration all at that specific, correctly delayed past moment.
Yes. Particularly the second derivative, the acceleration at time tau, because that's what dictates the radiation field.
It feels like the field is sort of frozen in relation to the source's motion at that earlier time, and then just propagates outwards.
That's a great way to put it. It maintains causality at light speed.
Okay, this retarded time thing is fundamental. Now, what happens when we have charges accelerating in very specific ways, like going in circles really fast?
Yes. That brings us to synchrotron radiation, a really spectacular phenomenon.
So the setup is you have a charge, maybe an electron, moving incredibly fast, almost deceleration.
Right, relativistic speeds. And it enters a strong uniform magnetic field, phi dollar.
The magnetic force, phi dollars QV times B, is always perpendicular to the velocity dollars, right?
Always, which means it doesn't speed the electron up or slow it down. It just changes its direction continuously.
Forcing it into a circular path.
Exactly. And constant change in direction means constant acceleration, even if the speed is constant.
And accelerating charges radiate. We know that from classical E&M. But here, because VOWS is near, something wild happens to the radiation.
It gets beamed, intensely focused. Instead of radiating sort of equally in all directions relative to its acceleration, the light shoots out almost entirely in the direction the electron is momentarily moving.
Like a headlight on a relativistic train.
A very, very narrow headlight beam. Feynman talks about the math, and there's this factor in the denominator, $1 he sees, cos theta, where theta is the angle to the direction of motion.
And when that is almost to theta, that denominator gets incredibly small for theta near zero, meaning straight ahead.
Making the field strength in that forward direction enormous. The light comes out in these intense pulses confined to a tiny cone. If you were standing off to the side, you'd just see a flash as the cone swept past you.
And the energy loss is huge. Feynman gives this example. A 1 billion electron volt BAVE electron in a 10,000 gas field.
Yeah, the radius of its orbit is only about 3.7 meters, but the energy it radiates is immense. And because of the relativistic effects, the frequency of the light is pushed way up, often into the visible or even X-ray part of the spectrum.
This isn't just theory either. You mentioned the Crab Nebula earlier.
That's a classic example. The light we see from it, especially its polarization, perfectly matches the predictions for synchrotron radiation. It tells us there are incredibly energetic electrons spiraling in magnetic fields out there in space. It's cosmic particle physics in action.
Wow. Okay, so that's continuous circular acceleration. What about the opposite, like a sudden stop?
Right, that's Bremsstrahlung. It literally means breaking radiation in German.
So instead of a nice smooth circle, you have a fast charge, like an electron that maybe slams into something
Yeah.
or gets sharply deflected by a nucleus.
Exactly. It undergoes a very rapid deceleration, a huge, brief spike in acceleration.
And that sudden jolt radiates energy.
Very effectively. Again, because the initial velocity is often relativistic, the radiation is predominantly thrown forward. This is actually how we generate high-energy X-rays in labs and medical equipment. You slam fast electrons into a metal target.
So synchrotron is continuous turning. Bremsstrahlung is a sudden stop or deflection. Both rely on relativistic acceleration, causing focused radiation.
Precisely. The core physics is the same. Accelerating charges radiate, relativity beams it forward.
Okay, we've talked about how motion creates the light. Let's shift gears. How does the motion of the source or observer change the properties of the light itself, like its frequency? This is the relativistic Doppler effect, right?
Yes. We all know the classical Doppler effect, ambulance siren changing pitch as it passes.
Yeah.
Higher frequency coming towards you, lower going away.
Because the wave crests get bunched up or stretched out.
Right. But when the source is moving at speeds comparable to $2, we have to account for time dilation as well. The source's clock is running slow relative to the observer.
Ah, so it's not just the wave spacing, it's the rate at which the waves are emitted in the first place, from our perspective.
Exactly. The formula Feynman derives includes that Vol.1 V2C2 factor. For a source moving towards you, the frequency you reserve is higher, but the formula is omega 1 plus Vc. It combines both effects.
And the really weird part, the purely relativistic part, is the transverse Doppler effect.
That's the mind bender. Classically, if a source moves just sideways, perpendicular to your line of sight, its distance isn't changing, so there's no frequency shift.
But relativity says its clock is slow.
So even if it's just moving across your view, you will see a frequency shift, specifically a redshift, a lower frequency. Omega, where gamma is the Lorentz factor, it's direct proof of time dilation.
Okay, so frequency to omega changes.
Yep.
And wavelength line must change too, since the speed of light c to diagonal has to stay constant, right? Dollar through omega 2, the wave number must also change.
Yes, omega and dollar are intimately linked. And this leads to one of the most powerful concepts in relativity, the wave 4 vector, or the omega k4 vector.
Just like position 6 of the mu dollar and time tau form a 4 vector that transforms together under Lorentz transformations.
Frequency omega and the wave number vector, math BFA, which has components 6 odd legs, k6 others pointing in the wave's direction, also form a 4 vector.
Why is that so important? Why can't we just transform omega and Kellard using separate rules?
Because if they transformed independently, their ratio omega dollar wouldn't necessarily stay constant.
Meaning the speed of light, sex dollar, would appear different to different observers, which is forbidden.
Precisely. The 4-vector structure guarantees that omega transforms like time and math k transforms like space in such a way that the combination omega follows the Lorentz transformation rules. This ensures omega k cell for all inertial observers. It preserves the constancy of the speed of light.
That's elegant. It's like the math enforces the physics postulate. Okay, still in the theme of directions changing, let's talk about aberration.
Right. Aberration is about the apparent angle of incoming light changing because the observer is moving.
Feynman uses the analogy of rain, right? If rain falls straight down, but you're running.
You have to tilt your umbrella or a tube forward to catch the drops. You're moving into them.
So light from a star might be coming straight towards the solar system, but because the Earth is moving in its orbit.
We have to tilt our telescopes slightly forward in the direction of Earth's motion to see the star. The apparent direction shifts.
And relativistically, this shift is slightly different than the simple classical prediction.
Yes, again, that Vol.1 V2C2 factor pops up. The angle gets shifted more than classically predicted, compressing the apparent positions of stars towards the direction of motion. It's the same kind of angular compression we saw with synchrotron radiation, but applied to observed light rather than emitted light.
Okay, that makes sense. One last big piece from the chapter, the momentum of light.
Ah, yes. This connects everything back to fundamental energy and momentum conservation.
We know light carries energy, sunlight warms things up. But does it carry momentum? Does it push?
It absolutely does. Classical electromagnetism predicts it, and experiments confirm it. It's called radiation pressure. When light hits a surface and is absorbed or reflected, it exerts a tiny force.
And Feynman shows there's a direct link between the energy flow and the momentum.
A beautiful, simple relationship. If light is delivering energy at a rate WET, the force it exerts is $1 is 1 WTT.
Which implies that if a beam of light carries a total energy dollar, it must also carry a total momentum into WCT. That comes straight from Maxwell's equations.
It does. It's a classical result. But then Feynman makes this beautiful bridge to quantum mechanics.
With photons, we know the energy of a single photon is W bar omega, where WR is Planck's constant.
So if the classical rule, PwC tall, and the bar omega, and we also know T omega...
Then PUT, the momentum of a photon, must be W times its wave number.
Exactly. And look what we have now. We have the energy 1W math BFP and the momentum vector math BFP.
Wait, so the energy momentum 4 vector, PX, POYPE, for a particle of light
Is just dollar times the wave 4 vector techie x PSE nu omega we talked about earlier.
Yeah, okay. That ties it all together.
It really does. The 4-vector formalism isn't just a mathematical convenience. It reveals this deep fundamental connection between the wave properties of light, frequency, and wave number, and its particle properties, energy and momentum, all consistent within the framework of relativity.
So let's recap this whirlwind tour. We started with the fundamental challenge. You can only know about a charge's pass because of the light speed limit, leading to retarded time.
Right. Solving for that past state is key. Then we saw how extreme acceleration, whether continuous turning in synchrotron radiation or sudden stopping in Bremsstrahlung, leads to intense relativistically beamed radiation.
Then we saw how motion affects the light itself, changing its frequency via the relativistic Doppler effect, including that weird transverse shift, and its apparent direction via aberration.
And the crucial theoretical tool tying transformations together was the omega Ki4 vector, ensuring the speed of light remains constant.
Finally, we connected light's energy dollars to its momentum pi's pay, finding a direct link via wave 4 vector and the energy momentum 4 vector.
The grand synthesis is really the power of these 4 vectors. They are relativity's way of ensuring that the fundamental laws like conservation of energy and momentum or the constancy of dollar look the same are invariant no matter how you're moving inertially.
That consistency, that invariance built into the mathematical structure,
Yeah.
That's the real magic of relativity, isn't it? It ensures physics works universally.
Absolutely. It's the deep structure ensuring coherence across different viewpoints.
And thinking about that energy, momentum, frequency, wave number connection, it really blurs the line between wave and particle, doesn't it? Which, as Feynman hints, opens the door to quantum field theory. Something to maybe ponder after this dive.
A perfect place to pause, I think.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into relativistic radiation. We hope this gives you a clearer picture of these fascinating and sometimes mind-bending effects.